Yeah. I mean, folks always will ask about the social. Everyone wants to know, like, because everyone's looking for this secret. How are you going to make social work? Right. And for me, like, I do believe very strongly in organic content. You can play with paid, but you really need a strong organic base first. The challenge for me personally with social is that it's just changing all the darn time. And I don't have the capacity for that. I'm not going to pay attention to the algorithm every 5 minutes and, move from, short captions to long captions to videos to not videos to, pointing and dancing. And
I know, we're recording audio right now. So like people
right?
can't see me rolling my eyes and dropping my head back in frustration, but
Yeah.
it's there. And like, it's not just
Yeah.
the algorithm. It's like 6 different algorithms because every platform has a different
Exactly.
algorithm.
Has their own.
Yeah. And so it's like what works on TikTok, and like TikTok came up and that was why Instagram added reels. So then you have to think
Yeah.
about like, even when I'm creating so I can repurpose across multiple channels, I still have to worry about 2 different algorithms for 3 if you
Exactly.
count YouTube Shorts. It's too
Exactly.
much.
It was too much. And I really, I had this sort of vision for the business that, I wouldn't just have, sort of consulting or, done for you services in the mix. I really wanted to have, a framework that could be applied to businesses regardless of the stage of growth that they were in.
Mm.
Because the agency really was designed for, coaches that were super successful already, like high multi-six,
Yeah.
7-figure businesses.
In order to hire an
And that
agency, you
just,
need to be an
exactly,
enterprise.
you need to be, right. You need to be an
Mhm.
enterprise. And it just, for me, like the journey that I went on is just kind of like, I'm like, some of the things that I know now, if I knew back then, or was able to help my clients back then, like it would have been so powerful. And so I just really wanted to have a way to use my expertise and support a wider range of businesses. And so I was really thinking, okay, well, what's something that every business I know is going to really benefit from? And again, like in that creation process, I'm like, well, I also don't want to be creating something that I'm going to have to be recreating all the time because the 6 different algorithms change, or we've got a brand new baby who was birthed yesterday, Clubhouse. Hello, boys. Are we still using Clubhouse? I don't know.
I think it's
But
gone
you
now.
know what I mean?
Is it a still thing?
I'm not sure.
I never even made
I'm
an
not
account. I
sure.
just gave up before I
Right?
started. I was like, it's audio
Right?
only, and I
Yeah.
have no ability to record, and all of this
Yeah.
just seems a little sketchy and inaccessible.
Yeah.
And I don't when I get
Right?
the ickies and I haven't even like logged onto the platform, I'm like, maybe that's just not the spot
Yeah,
for me.
it's not for me. That's me in TikTok. That's me in TikTok. And like I got past the first screen, not the first screen, the opening thing where all the TikToks are TikToking, and I was like, I might pass out. I'm feeling ill, so it's not for me. But it's okay.
I don't have a TikTok account. People will send me TikToks
No.
and I'll be like, no, can you just tell me the gist of what's happening here?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I understand that it's supposed to
Tell
be
me what
funny, but like,
happened.
no, just give me a
Yeah.
book, man. I think I just get so overstimulated by short form
Yeah,
video
that's exactly what
that
it
like
is.
my brain, I understand why people want to binge it, but it's almost like I know that it's like eating an M&M. If I eat one M&M, I'm going to eat the whole damn
One is
bag.
good. Exactly. Yeah. I'm like that. I'm like that with the Cheetos, evidence, in the kitchen, the Cheetos are there. But yeah, so I just knew as I was creating this thing that I'm like, I want something that's tried and true, that really, leverages my expertise. And my expertise is not in the figuring out of all these different platforms. It's really in smart messaging that does the job of moving ideal clients along their buyer's journey and towards the place of like saying, yeah, I'm ready to work with you, and taking that action. Right. So, and of course we can argue, well, email is not a brand new platform either. But if we go back to direct mail, like that, when I was in corporate, that's where I played as well, was direct mail, direct messaging. Right.
I
So
mean,
that,
there are
that was
trends
the
that change in
precursor.
email and there are deliverability issues, but like a
Right.
well-written email is a well-written email. And then you just need to think about how do I get people to open it,
Exactly.
How do I,
Yeah,
and
exactly. And there's data there that we can use. And that for me, like the
Mhm.
marketing nerd in me is like, I want data attached so that I can make decisions, right? Because it's like, oh, they're not opening the email. Okay, great. So we can look at deliverability. Is that a thing? We can look at list health. Do we need to do a list cleanse? Okay, do we need to play with some different lengths of message? Do we need to have something that's a little more activating? Like I have next steps I can take when I look at email data. And with social data, I don't know if it's like me or the algorithm or like, you know what I mean? It's just too amorphous. I need it to be a little bit more of an equation that I can solve versus a puzzle that has no box and a lot of pieces.
Yeah, I don't even think it's a puzzle because I don't think that there's like a complete picture that you're supposed to be using. It's almost like
right.
A puzzle would make sense even if you don't have an idea of where it's going to end. But this feels more just like, I don't know. I'm trying to come up with a metaphor and it's nothing.
It's not landing. Well,
it's like a
splatter
painting. It's like Jackson Pollock.
There you go.
It's just like, yeah, it's pretty, but like, what is it?